My name is Clara Bennett, and I was 32 years old the night my mom told me I was a failure in front of everyone. I remember the sound before I remember the words. Forks scraping plates. Someone coughing, a laugh that came half a second too late. I was standing at the edge of the dining room in my aunt's house in Columbus, Ohio, holding a paper plate that was slowly bending in my hands. And I already knew something bad was coming before my mom even opened her mouth. She always cleared her throat when she wanted attention. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to make people turn toward her without realizing they were doing it. Conversations thinned out. Heads tilted. I was still chewing when she smiled, that tight smile she used whenever she was about to hurt someone and call it honesty. I worry about her, my mom said, nodding in my direction like I wasn't standing 10 feet away. She's 32 and still hasn't made anything of herself. No husband, no real career. Always jumping between these little ideas. I guess some people just don't have what it takes, no matter how hard you try. No one said my name. They didn't have to. The sentence landed on me anyway, heavy and public and impossible to dodge. The room did that thing people do when they're uncomfortable but don't want to be involved. My cousin stared at her food like it had suddenly become fascinating. My uncle checked his phone. Someone laughed, a short, nervous sound, like laughter could smooth the moment over if they used it fast enough. I stood there with my plate and felt my chest go tight, then hollow. Not shock. Not surprise, just that familiar drop like my body already knew the script. I smiled. I always smiled. I said something small and forgettable, something like, "Yeah, I'm still figuring things out." I excused myself and walked to the bathroom without rushing, because rushing would have made it real. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and looked at my reflection. My face didn't look broken. That almost made it worse. I had this irrational thought that if I looked devastated, someone might notice later and feel bad. I didn't cry. I never cry in front of mirrors. Mirrors remember. What no one in that dining room knew, not my mom, not my loud, successful brother, not a single person pretending not to listen, was that I had already outgrown every one of them financially. What no one knew was that the house my mom bragged about owning, the one she liked to remind me she earned without help, had its mortgage quietly paid off by money that passed through my accounts first. What no one knew was that the company my uncle spent 20 minutes praising for being rock solid was already on my screen back home, flagged, mapped, and slowly unraveling. But I didn't say any of that. I washed my hands. I fixed my hair. I went back out and finished the night like I had just been lightly teased, because real power doesn't interrupt, it observes. Growing up, I learned how to disappear without leaving the room. My mom loved visible wins, trophies, titles, stories she could repeat to strangers. My older brother Mark was perfect for that. Captain of the football team, business degree, sales director before 30. He had words that impressed people immediately. I had silence. I noticed patterns. I remembered numbers. I heard what people said when they thought no one important was listening. When I was 10, I realized our babysitter was charging extra hours that didn't exist. When I was 16, I caught a teacher quietly adjusting grades for athletes. I never confronted either of them. I just learned how easy it was for people to cheat when they assumed no one would look closely. My mom called me passive. She told me over and over that the world would eat me alive if I didn't toughen up. What she meant was that I didn't perform strength the way she recognized it. After college, my life looked unimpressive on purpose. Customer support, data entry, contract review, jobs people call temporary because they can't imagine choosing them. I let everyone think I was drifting. What I was actually doing was learning how money moves when no one is watching, how lies repeat themselves, how systems hide their weakest points in boring places. My first real break didn't look like success. It was a quiet audit for a nonprofit in Dayton. They thought they had a budgeting issue. What they had was a trusted administrator stealing just enough to stay invisible. I showed them the pattern. He was fired without drama. I was paid more than I'd ever made in a month. I didn't celebrate, I documented. That job led to another, then another. I formed an LLC with a forgettable name. I kept my LinkedIn empty. I never corrected my mom when she told people I was still finding myself. So when she called me a failure in front of everyone, it didn't hurt because it was untrue. It hurt because some small, stupid part of me had hoped she might see me without proof. 2 weeks later, an email landed in my inbox from a junior accountant in Chicago. He wrote like someone who was scared and exhausted and done being ignored. He said the numbers didn't add up. He said his concerns were brushed off. He said he thought he was imagining things. The company names stopped me cold. I already had a folder on them. I replied with one sentence, "You're not wrong." What followed was months of quiet work. Late nights, encrypted calls, shared spreadsheets. The con was clean and confident. Shell vendors, inflated invoices, kickbacks looping back through consulting fees. It had been running for years because everyone involved trusted reputation more than reality. I didn't rush. I never rush. I let them dig deeper. I built a timeline so simple it was impossible to argue with. When I finally presented it to the board, I wore a gray blazer and no makeup. I introduced myself without emphasis. No one recognized my name. That was intentional. By the end of the meeting, 3 executives were suspended. One resigned before the investigation finished. The junior accountant kept his job. I was paid quietly through my boring LLC. A month later, my mom texted me a news article about the scandal. "Can you believe this? You never know who to trust these days." I stared at the message and felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not triumph, just clarity. I replied, "Yeah, it's wild." That's the advantage of being underestimated. People reveal everything when they think you don't matter. This is the story of how I stopped needing my mother's approval, how I exposed a lie that had been hiding in plain sight, and how I walked back into a room that once reduced me to a joke, not to explain myself, but to reclaim my dignity. It starts with a dinner table, a paper plate, and a sentence that was meant to break me. I wasn't born quiet. That part matters. When I was little, I asked too many questions. I wanted to know why things worked the way they did, why adults said one thing and did another, why rules bent for some people and snapped for others. My mom used to laugh about it when I was small, telling people I was curious, observant, sharp. That changed the first time my questions embarrassed her. I was 7 when it happened. We were at a school fundraiser, one of those forced smile events with folding chairs and boxed cookies. A man from the PTA was giving a speech about transparency and community trust. I tugged on my mom's sleeve and whispered that he was the same man who had taken money from the classroom jar the week before. I'd seen him do it. I thought I was helping. My mom's grip on my wrist tightened instantly. She smiled at the people around us and whispered through her teeth that I needed to stop talking. On the drive home, she told me something I never forgot. She said not everything you notice needs to be said. She said people do like it when you point things out. She said if I wanted an easy life, I needed to learn when to stay quiet. So I learned. Silence became a skill. Observation became armor. I watched how praise worked. I watched how blame moved. I watched how confidence, even when it was fake, protected people better than truth ever did. By middle school, I understood something most adults still don't. The loudest people weren't the strongest. They were the most fragile. They needed constant reinforcement. They needed witnesses. I stopped needing witnesses. Mark, my brother, soaked up attention like oxygen. My mom orbited him, proud and loud. His mistakes were reframed as lessons. Mine were labeled flaws. If Mark failed a test, it was because the teacher didn't challenge him. If I failed, it was because I didn't try hard enough. So I stopped competing where the scoreboard was rigged. In high school, I stayed invisible on purpose. No clubs, no drama, no scenes. Teachers described me as pleasant, quiet, forgettable. I let them. Being underestimated felt safer than being misunderstood. But invisibility has perks. People talked around me. They vented. They bragged. They confessed without realizing they were confessing. I learned who cheated, who lied, who cut corners. I learned that systems rarely fail on their own. They fail because people push them just far enough to profit. By the time I graduated, I didn't dream about changing the world. I wanted to understand it. College was the first place I realized how much power lived in boring details. I didn't major in anything impressive. I chose something practical, something that sounded like a placeholder when people asked. I worked part-time jobs that put me close to data, close to transactions, close to the quiet machinery no one celebrates. I watched students inflate hours. I watched organizations misuse grants. I watched administrators ignore it because the offenders were charismatic or useful. No one ever worried about me. After graduation, when people expected me to make some kind of announcement about my future, I didn't. I took a customer support job that paid just enough to survive. My mom hated it. She asked me weekly when I planned to do something real. What she didn't understand was that customer support is where lies go to die. People tell the truth when they're angry, when they think they've been wronged, when they believe the person on the other end has no power. I documented everything. Patterns emerged fast. Refund abuse, internal overrides, supervisors protecting certain accounts. I wasn't emotional about it. I was precise. From there, I moved into data entry, then contract review. Always adjacent to money. Always just important enough to see everything and just unimportant enough to be ignored. That was intentional. The first time I tested my leverage, it wasn't dramatic. A mid-level manager was manipulating vendor contracts and pinning the losses on clerical errors. I noticed the timestamps didn't line up. I built a quiet file. When he tried to throw me under the bus for a missing payment, I didn't argue. I asked one question. Calm, documented. He backed off immediately. That was when I understood something fundamental. Control didn't come from confrontation. It came from preparation. I started taking freelance work at night. Small audits, short-term reviews I never advertised. People found me through whispers, through someone who knew someone who needed answers without noise. I didn't fix everything. I chose my targets. I learned how cons evolved. How they grew bolder when unchecked. How people at the top convinced themselves they deserved more. Every job sharpened me. Meanwhile, my mom kept telling people I was lost, that I was drifting. That she worried about me. She meant it as concern. She delivered it like a verdict. I stopped correcting her because correcting her would have revealed me. By the time I formed my LLC, I already knew exactly what it would and wouldn't be. No flashy branding. No thought leadership. No social presence. A name so dull it disappeared in a search result. I didn't want clients who needed applause. I wanted clients who needed silence. That was the version of me standing in that bathroom after the dinner. Not broken. Not surprised. Just finished pretending I was small. What my mom never understood was that while she was measuring success by volume, I was measuring it by control. And control, once you have it, changes everything. The first time I decided to stop watching and start acting, I understood exactly what it would cost me. That's the part people skip when they imagine quiet revenge. They think it's painless because it's silent. It's not. Silence just means you suffer privately. The job came through a referral I almost ignored. A regional healthcare services company in Indiana. Mid-sized, reputable. The kind of place politicians toured for photo ops. They didn't think they had a crime. They thought they had inefficiency. I was brought in on a 3-month contract to review vendor agreements and cost overruns. Low visibility. No authority. Perfect. On my first day, no one looked up when I walked past their desks. I was introduced as support. Temporary, replaceable. The kind of word that makes people honest. By the end of the first week, I knew 2 things for certain. The numbers were wrong. And the people who knew they were wrong were very calm about it. The con wasn't loud. It was layered. Medical supplies routed through shell vendors. Slightly inflated invoices approved automatically because the amounts fell just under review thresholds. Rebates that never made it back to the company. I didn't confront anyone. I never do. I built a map. I tracked timestamps, approval chains, and invoice language. I noticed the same phrases repeating across supposedly unrelated vendors. I watched who went on vacation when audits were scheduled. I noted who joked about compliance and who went quiet when it came up. The center of it all was a man named Richard Hale, director level. Charismatic, the kind of guy who slapped backs and remembered birthdays. Everyone trusted him, which meant no one checked him, including my manager. She liked Richard. She told me so during my second week. She said he was a good guy, that he'd helped her when she was new. She warned me, casually, not to dig too deep because people got territorial about their processes. I thanked her and kept digging. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just padding. This was theft. Over years, millions, and here's the part that made it personal. The losses were being quietly offset by layoffs in departments that actually touched patients. Lower staffing. Longer wait times. Worse outcomes. People were getting hurt so Richard could keep his lifestyle comfortable. That was when I decided I wasn't just observing anymore, but I still didn't rush. I knew the risk. Contractors don't get protected. Whistleblowers without status get erased. If I went to HR, the file would disappear. If I went to compliance too early, Richard would get tipped off. So I created insurance. I documented everything twice. Once in the company system, exactly where it belonged, clean and boring. And once outside, time-stamped, backed up, impossible to erase. Then I waited for him to make a mistake. He did, eventually. They always do. It was a Friday afternoon when he forwarded an invoice approval from his personal email by accident. Personal, not company. That single detail cracked the whole thing open. I didn't celebrate. I escalated, not loudly, strategically. I requested a routine clarification through the proper channel, neutral language. No accusations, just enough to trigger a mandatory internal review. The audit started quietly the following week. Richard noticed me for the first time on Tuesday. He stopped by my desk, smiled too hard, asked how I was settling in. Told me he admired people who worked hard without needing attention. I nodded and thanked him. That night, my access permissions changed. By Wednesday, my manager told me there had been concerns about my scope. She said Richard felt I was overstepping. She said maybe I should focus on my assigned tasks. I said okay. I had already finished what I needed. On Thursday, the internal auditors found the shell vendors. On Friday morning, Richard didn't come in. By Monday, the company announced an external investigation. By Wednesday, Richard resigned for personal reasons. The press release used words like restructuring and accountability. No one mentioned my name. That was the deal. What people don't talk about is the aftermath, the cold space after the win. My contract wasn't renewed. Officially, the role was no longer needed. Unofficially, I was inconvenient. I packed my desk while people avoided eye contact. My manager hugged me and said she hoped I landed somewhere good. I smiled and told her I would. 2 weeks later, I received a wire transfer that dwarfed every paycheck I'd ever earned. The board didn't want noise. They wanted resolution. Silence costs money. I used part of it to pay off my student loans. I used part of it to fund my LLC properly. And I used a small, petty part of it to do something I'd planned since the day my mom laughed at my customer support job. I donated anonymously to the hospital wing that had been understaffed because of Richard's theft. My mom called me that night. She said she'd read an article about the healthcare company scandal. She said it was terrifying how things like that happened. She said people were greedy. Then she asked if I'd had any luck finding a better job yet. I looked at the wall of my apartment, at the spreadsheets open on my laptop, at the growing list of clients who wanted my kind of quiet help. I told her I was doing okay. She said she was glad. She said she just wanted me to be secure. I said I know. When I hung up, I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. That case changed my reputation in rooms I wasn't in. My name started moving without me. Carefully, selectively, people who needed discretion found me. People who wanted credit did not. I stopped taking random contracts. I started choosing problems with leverage. And somewhere between that first major exposure and the second, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge that looked like victory. I needed revenge that looked like invisibility. Because the most effective punishment for people who steal in the dark is not humiliation. It's removal. And I was getting very good at removing people. The case that finally crossed into my family didn't announce itself. It never does. It started with a name I already knew: Mark. My brother called me on a Sunday afternoon, which was unusual enough that I almost let it go to voicemail. We weren't close. We were polite. Our conversations were updates, not connections. He sounded confident when I picked up, relaxed, successful. He always did. He told me he'd taken a new role: senior sales director at a fast-growing financial services firm based in Texas. He said the money was great. He said the leadership team was brilliant. He said he finally felt like he was playing in the big leagues. I congratulated him. I meant it. Then he asked what I was doing these days. I gave him the version of the truth people could digest: consulting, contract work, mostly remote, nothing exciting. He laughed and said that sounded about right. He told me I'd always been smart, just not ambitious. He said not everyone was built for pressure. I didn't correct him. 2 days later, I saw his company's name pop up in my inbox. Not from him, from a different client. A private equity group had hired me to do preliminary diligence on a potential acquisition. Routine. Quiet, early stage. They wanted to know if anything felt off before they went further. The target company was Mark's company. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I considered declining. Not because I couldn't do the work, but because I already knew what it would mean if I did. Family complicates things. Sentiment clouds precision. Then I remembered the hospital wing, the layoffs. The people who paid the price when no one wanted to look closely. I accepted the contract. I told myself one thing and I meant it. I wouldn't protect him, and I wouldn't target him either. I would just follow the numbers. The numbers didn't take long. Within a week, I saw the familiar shape. Aggressive revenue recognition. Sales booked before contracts were finalized. Fees shifted between quarters to smooth growth. Nothing illegal at first glance, just optimistic. Then I looked deeper. Side agreements. Verbal promises not reflected in the books. Incentives structured to encourage overstatement. A culture that rewarded speed and punished questions. Mark was good at his job. That much was clear. He closed deals. He motivated teams. He also benefited directly from the illusion. The commission structure was the tell. Sales leaders were being paid on projected revenue, not realized revenue. If deals collapsed later, the clawbacks were slow, negotiable, often waived. It wasn't just risky. It was engineered. I built my file carefully. I didn't use my name in notes. I referred to roles, not people. I stripped emotion out of everything. Still, I felt it. Late at night, alone with the data, I felt the old weight settle in my chest. The same one I'd felt at the dinner table. The same one I'd felt growing up in Mark's shadow. I didn't want to be right, but I was. The private equity group asked for a call. They were concerned. They said the growth story felt fragile. They asked me how confident I was. I told them the truth. I said if they acquired the company as is, they would inherit a reckoning. I said the risk wasn't hypothetical. It was baked in. They thanked me. They paused the deal. That alone would have been enough. Quiet outcome, no fallout. But Mark didn't stay quiet. A week later, my mom called me, agitated. She said Mark was under a lot of stress. She said his company was going through changes. She said he felt blindsided by outside scrutiny. Then she said something that snapped everything into focus. She said he thought someone was sabotaging them, someone with an agenda. I asked her what she meant. She hesitated. Then she said Mark had mentioned my line of work. She said he wondered out loud if I'd ever crossed paths with his company. I felt something cold move through me, not fear, recognition. I told her I hadn't spoken to anyone about Mark's job. That was true. She said good. She said family should stick together. After we hung up, I checked my logs. Someone had tried to access my files. Not successfully, but deliberately. The attempt came from an IP address linked to Mark's company. That was the moment it stopped being theoretical. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn him. I didn't call him to clear the air. I fortified. I locked everything down. I segmented data. I prepared disclosures I hadn't planned to use. Then I waited. The external review Mark's company triggered found what I already knew. Revenue restatements, internal emails, incentive abuse. Mark wasn't charged with a crime. He didn't steal directly. He just benefited from the system and defended it when questioned. That distinction didn't save his job. He resigned quietly 3 months later. No scandal, no headlines. Just a line on LinkedIn about exploring new opportunities. My mom called me crying. She said she didn't understand how this could happen to him. She said he'd worked so hard. She said it wasn't fair. I listened. She asked me if I thought the company had been treated too harshly. I said no. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said I always did have strong opinions. After the call, I sat alone in my apartment and let myself feel it. Not triumph, not guilt, relief. For the first time in my life, the truth had moved through my family without being filtered through my mother's expectations. I hadn't destroyed Mark. I had simply stopped protecting a lie. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Blame never comes from the person who benefits the most. It comes from the one who feels the loss most sharply. In my family, that person was my Aunt Linda. She was my mom's older sister, the unofficial historian of our lives. She remembered everything, or at least the version of everything that made sense to her. She was also the first to notice patterns she didn't like. A month after Mark resigned, she invited me to coffee. Not casually, deliberately. She chose a cafe near her office, loud enough that she assumed conversations blurred into background noise. She arrived early and had already ordered when I walked in. Control disguised as courtesy. She didn't waste time. She told me she'd been thinking a lot about timing, about coincidences, about how strange it was that companies connected to people in our family seemed to unravel right after I passed through their orbit. She smiled when she said it, like she was testing a joke. I stirred my coffee and said nothing. She leaned forward. She said she'd done some digging, that she knew I worked in consulting, that she'd looked up my LLC. She said it was suspicious how little information there was about me online. She asked me, directly, if I had anything to do with Mark losing his job. I looked at her and felt something settle into place. Not panic, not anger, confirmation. I told her the truth carefully. I said I did diligence work. I said I followed numbers. I said I didn't make decisions, I presented facts. I said outcomes weren't mine to control. She didn't like that answer. She said families protect each other. She said outsiders wouldn't understand context the way we did. She said Mark was ambitious, not dishonest. She said I had always resented him. That one landed where she meant it to. I asked her a question then, quiet, simple. I asked her if she believed the numbers were wrong. She didn't answer. Instead, she warned me. She said people were talking. She said it wouldn't look good if it got out that I'd hurt my own brother. She said reputations mattered. I thanked her for the coffee. 2 days later, my mom called me in tears. She said Linda had told her I sabotaged Mark. She said Linda thought I'd been holding a grudge for years. She said she didn't know who to believe. I listened. Then my mom asked me the question I'd been waiting for my whole life. She asked me if it was true. I didn't defend myself. I said I had done my job. She said that wasn't an answer. I said it was the only honest one. Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing. I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table, the same one where she used to lecture me about potential. She said she was disappointed. Not angry, disappointed. That word still had power over me, but not enough to change the truth. I told her I loved her. I told her I wouldn't apologize for doing my work ethically. I told her if she wanted to believe I was capable of ruining someone's life out of spite, that was her choice. She hung up. What Linda didn't know was that, while she was questioning my loyalty, She was creating a paper trail. She emailed a former colleague of mine asking vague questions about my work. She messaged someone connected to the private equity group Mark's company had dealt with. She thought she was being subtle. She was. Those messages made their way back to me. I didn't respond. I documented. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I protected myself publicly without revealing anything private. I accepted a speaking invitation, not under my name, under my LLC. It was a closed-door industry panel on risk assessment and ethical diligence. No press, no recordings, just people who mattered. I spoke calmly. I spoke generally. I spoke about the cost of ignoring early warning signs. I spoke about how often messengers are blamed instead of systems. I never mentioned Mark. I never mentioned family. But the message landed. Within weeks, my professional reputation hardened into something untouchable. People stopped asking who I was connected to. They started asking what I saw. Linda stopped calling. At the next family gathering, she barely looked at me. My mom was polite, distant, careful. I felt the old instinct to shrink, to smooth things over. I ignored it. Because blame only works when you accept it. And I was done accepting narratives that were never mine to begin with. The call came 3 months after my mom stopped speaking to me regularly. Not dramatically, not apologetically, just practical. She asked if I had time to look at something for her. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was inevitable. People always circle back when the ground under them starts to shift, even when they don't realize what they're standing on. She told me she and a friend from church were involved in an investment opportunity, something stable, conservative, safe. She emphasized that word like she knew I would question it. She said the returns were modest but reliable. She said everyone she trusted was already in. She said she just wanted a second set of eyes. I asked her to send me the documents. She hesitated, then said she didn't want me to overthink it. She said sometimes I saw problems where there weren't any. I told her I'd take a quick look. The files arrived 10 minutes later. It took me less than 5 minutes to understand what she was involved in. It wasn't sophisticated. It didn't need to be. It was a classic affinity scam, dressed up in church language and friendly testimonials. Promissory notes with vague collateral. Guaranteed returns explained by strategies that didn't exist. The operator's name jumped out at me immediately. I'd seen him before. He was a mid-level player in a case I'd declined the year before. Not clever enough to go big. Just patient enough to go unnoticed. He targeted trust, not intelligence. My mom had already invested, not everything, but enough to hurt. I closed my laptop and sat very still. This was the moment I'd imagined in smaller ways my whole life. The moment where she needed something from me that couldn't be performed loudly or dismissed easily. The moment where my skills mattered in a way she couldn't reframe. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say anything about being disappointed. I asked her one question. I asked her how many people she'd told about it. She said 4. That was manageable. I told her I needed time. I told her not to move any more money. I told her not to confront anyone. She bristled. She asked why. I said because if you're wrong, you want to be quiet. She didn't like that answer, but she listened. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked the case the same way I always did. Slowly. Carefully, without emotion. I mapped the flow of funds. I traced shell accounts. I documented false statements. I identified the pressure points. I didn't tell my mom what I was doing. I just told her I was looking. She checked in every few days. Her tone changed each time, less confident, more tentative. When I was ready, I made 3 calls. One to an attorney who specialized in financial recovery, one to a regulator who owed me a favor, and one to the man running the scam. I didn't threaten him. I told him I understood his structure. I told him I knew which accounts mattered. I told him I knew how fast his operation would collapse if the wrong people started asking questions. Then I gave him a choice. He could unwind quietly. Return principle, no admissions, no headlines, or he could explain himself later. He chose the first option. Within 10 days, my mom's money was back, so was everyone else's. The scam dissolved without a sound. The operator moved on to a different state. He always would. My mom came over the night the transfer cleared. She sat at my kitchen table the same way she used to when I was younger. She didn't bring food. She didn't bring excuses. She said thank you. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was sincere. She asked me how I knew what to do. I told her I'd been doing this for a long time. She nodded slowly, like she was recalibrating something internal. Then she said something that almost broke me. She said she wished she'd listened to me more when I was younger. I didn't respond right away, because forgiveness is a process, not a moment. I told her I was glad she called me. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Brief, careful. She said she didn't understand my work, but she understood now that it mattered. That was enough, not closure, but recognition. And for the first time since that dinner table, I felt the balance shift. Quietly, irreversibly. Aunt Linda didn't realize the truth all at once. It came to her the way inconvenient truths always do. In fragments, in contradictions, in moments that didn't line up no matter how she tried to rearrange them. It started with my mom. My mom had always talked about me the same way Linda did, carefully. With concern. With that soft pity people use when they want to sound kind while lowering expectations. But after the investment situation resolved, something shifted. Linda noticed it before anyone else. My mom stopped saying she worried about me. She stopped using that tone, the one that framed my life as unfinished. When my name came up, she didn't rush to explain or soften it. She just stated facts. She said I was busy. She said I worked in risk assessment. She said I helped people fix problems. No qualifiers. Linda asked questions. At first they were casual. She asked what kind of problems I fixed. She asked who my clients were. She asked how I'd helped my mom so quickly. My mom didn't give her much. She said I was good at what I did. That sentence bothered Linda more than any accusation ever could have. Then came the second fracture. Linda worked in real estate. She debuilt her identity around being informed, connected, ahead of the curve. One afternoon, she overheard two colleagues discussing a collapsed deal involving a financial services firm in Texas. Mark's old company. They weren't talking about him. They were talking about the diligence firm that had flagged the risks early. The quiet consultant who'd saved a private equity group millions. They didn't use my name. They used my LLC's name. Linda recognized it immediately. She went home and searched for it again, deeper this time, different databases. Professional networks she hadn't checked before. Patterns emerged. The healthcare company, the hospital wing, the investment unwind at church. All quiet, all clean. All connected by the same invisible thread. Me, that was when she understood what she'd been trying not to see. I hadn't sabotaged Mark. I hadn't lashed out. I had outgrown them. The realization didn't make her angry at first. It made her afraid. Because if I was capable of that level of control without recognition, then she had misjudged me completely. And people who misjudge power worry about what else they might be wrong about. She called my mom that night. I wasn't on the call, but I know how it went. I know because my mom told me later in pieces, like she was still processing it herself. Linda asked if I'd known about the scam before my mom invested. My mom said no. Linda asked if I'd ever used my work to hurt family. My mom paused. Then she said she didn't think so. Linda asked if my mom felt protected or manipulated. My mom said protected. That answer changed the temperature of the conversation. Linda didn't accuse after that. She pivoted. She reframed. She said she'd just been worried. She said she'd misunderstood things. She said families get messy when stress is involved. My mom didn't argue. She didn't need to. The next family gathering was where it finally surfaced. Linda arrived late. She watched me instead of greeting me. I felt her eyes on me the way you feel weather change. When we spoke, it was polite. Too polite. She told me she admired my work ethic. She said she hadn't realized how serious my career was. She said she hoped there were no hard feelings. I listened. Then she said something she thought was generous. She said it must be nice to finally be recognized. I looked at her and smiled. I told her recognition had never been my goal. That was when she understood she'd lost the upper hand. Because there's nothing more unsettling than realizing the person you tried to expose was never hiding. Linda didn't try again. She didn't confront me. She didn't warn others. She didn't dig deeper. She recalibrated. In our family, that looked like distance, like politeness without intimacy, like silence where gossip used to live, and that silence suited me just fine. Because the truth was no longer fragile. It didn't need defending. It had settled into the room, and everyone could feel it. My mom defended me in public for the first time at a place she cared deeply about. Church. If you want to understand my mother, you have to understand that church was her stage, not in a flashy way. In a respectable way. It was where her identity felt safest, where reputation mattered but quietly, where people watched each other under the cover of kindness. I wasn't there when it happened. That detail matters. I heard about it later from 3 different people, each version slightly different but circling the same moment. It started with a conversation after service. A small group near the coffee urns. Familiar faces. Familiar tones. Someone mentioned Mark. Someone shook their head sadly. Someone said it was such a shame how things had turned out. Then someone else said my name. They said it must have been hard for my mom, having one child stumble and the other drift. That was the word they used. Drift. Normally, my mom would have smiled politely. She would have softened it. She would have explained. She would have taken the burden of interpretation onto herself. This time, she didn't. She set her coffee down. She said, actually, that's not true. The group quieted. She said my daughter is very good at what she does. She said people come to her when they're in trouble and need things handled carefully. She said she'd helped more people than anyone realized. Someone laughed lightly and said, oh, like consulting. My mom met their eyes. She said like fixing things before they break everyone else. No apology, no laughter, just fact. The conversation moved on after that, awkwardly, the way it always does when someone refuses to play their assigned role. But the damage was done, not to me, to the narrative. I found out that evening when my mom called me. She didn't mention the moment directly at first. She asked how my week was. She asked if I was busy. Then she said people asked about you today. I waited. She said I told them you were doing important work. I felt something tighten behind my ribs, not relief, something more fragile. She said she hoped that was okay. I told her it was. She paused, then said she realized something after everything that had happened. She said she'd spent years talking about me as if I was unfinished, when really I was just private. She said she didn't understand my path, but she understood now that it wasn't small. I didn't interrupt. She said she was proud of me. The word landed softly, like it didn't want to scare me away. I closed my eyes. Pride doesn't erase the past, but it changes the weight of it. Later that week, I felt the ripple effects. A former acquaintance reached out with a careful message. Someone else asked if I took new clients. Someone mentioned my name in a room I wasn't in, and it didn't come with pity attached. My mom didn't brag. That was the difference, she stated. And in families like mine, that's louder than praise. When the next family gathering happened, the tone was different. My mom introduced me without qualifiers. She didn't explain me. She didn't apologize for me. She said this is my daughter. And for the first time, that was enough. I didn't say much that night. I didn't need to. The room had already adjusted. Quietly. Irreversibly. The final dinner happened in the same house as the first one. Same long table. Same plates. Same polite lighting meant to make everything look warmer than it really was. I noticed the symmetry immediately. This time I arrived on time. Not early. Not late. Exactly on time. I wore nothing remarkable. No signals, no armor, just calm. When I walked in, conversations paused for half a beat. Not because I demanded attention, but because people recalculated. My mom greeted me first. She hugged me, not the quick, performative kind. The steady kind. She didn't apologize, she didn't explain. She said she was glad I came. I believed her. We sat down, forks clinked, someone poured wine. Small talk filled the spaces where tension used to live. At some point, inevitably, the conversation turned to work. Someone asked what everyone was up to. Promotions were mentioned. Moves were announced. Titles were laid gently on the table like offerings. Then someone looked at me. They asked what I was doing these days. The room waited. Before I could answer, my mom spoke. She said my daughter works in risk and accountability. She helps organizations find problems before they hurt people. No smile, no exaggeration, just truth. No one laughed. Someone nodded. Someone asked a follow-up question. Someone else said that sounded important. I answered simply, briefly, and that was it. No one challenged it. No one reframed it. No one diminished it. Aunt Linda didn't look at me. Mark wasn't there. For the first time, the table didn't feel like a courtroom. It felt neutral. Later, as people stood around collecting coats, my mom touched my arm. She told me she used to think strength was loud. She said she knows better now. I nodded. That was enough. I don't talk about my work at family gatherings. I don't need to. Power that announces itself becomes fragile. Power that waits becomes permanent. People sometimes ask me if I ever confronted my mom about that night, if I ever brought it up. If I ever asked for an apology, I didn't, because the apology wasn't the point. The shift was. My mom no longer introduces me as a concern. She doesn't explain me away. She doesn't measure me against anyone else. She trusts me. That trust took years to earn, not because I lacked worth, but because she needed time to understand that worth doesn't always perform. As for my aunt, we remain polite, distant, balanced. As for my brother, we speak occasionally, carefully, honestly, without illusions. And as for me, I still move quietly. I still sit in rooms where people underestimate me. I still listen more than I speak. But now, when someone clears their throat to speak over me, I don't shrink. I wait. Because I know exactly who I am. And I know something else too. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It waits.